so we are going to be doing our fourth Byrds album, and it is our last Byrds album because we will not see any in the 1970s. For those that are just coming to the show right now, we covered Younger Than Yesterday way back in our earliest episodes. We then covered, I believe it was Notorious Byrd Brothers was next. Yep. And then our third Byrds album.
We did Sweetheart of the Rodeo.
Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Okay, I knew we did another. We did Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Matt and I did that one on the first Cleaning the Attic bonus episode, paired with the Monkees, if I remember correct, right?
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. So we've gotten a fair amount of mid to late Byrds. So now this is as early Byrds as it gets. Early Byrds. It's the first one. And so we'll see if the bird is the word, as Matt said before we came on right now. And you know what? I'm going to start the clock. And who better to start with than our own Sweetheart of the Rodeo, Matt?
Oh, it's me. Oh, that's so nice, John. It's a me. Audio.
It's a me.
All right. So I first have to say, we're recording this after we did our wrap up of the 1960s. And I think, John, you mentioned that when we were talking about like our biggest takeaways or biggest rediscoveries or, of the decade was your, realization, remembering that the Byrds are just freaking great.
Yes,
and
it was one of my two. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that this for me is like, cause I didn't really know a whole lot of Byrds, and it's just so up my alley, right? This is just full. So as opposed to, I would say Younger Than Yesterday, Notorious Byrd Brothers, where we saw them go a little bit more psychedelic, a little bit more experimental, starting to dip their toes into country, certainly went full blown country in Sweetheart of the Rodeo. This is the, like the pop, the poppier version of the Byrds.
Yes.
And first up front and center, you have, the jangle pop that we've talked about many, many times. It's all over the place. The guitars are just so well, they complement each other so well. I certainly recommend listening to this album with a headset because the stereo version, the stuff that's kind of going on and from one speaker to the next is very intricate, very great, very, very good. The harmonies are lush and, and just very soothing. And it's great. It's just pop, folk rock gold, and I have certainly a much more, newfound appreciation for them as a band. I didn't know a ton of the songs on this. I mean, certainly it starts off with Mr. Tambourine Man, which we've talked about before, one of the four Dylan songs that are on this, Dylan covers that are on this, and one of their probably biggest known songs. And they do, it's hard to argue that they don't do that better than Dylan does. It's a much more fuller song. It's a lusher sound. And they cover a couple other Dylan albums. And the big surprise here for me, guys, I had no idea that I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better was a Byrd song. I always knew that from Tom Petty on Full Moon Fever. I thought that was a Tom Petty song.
It sounds like Tom Petty on this album.
But Tom Petty covered this on Full Moon Fever, and I've known that album since like it came out in 1989 or 88 or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, this is a freaking Byrd song. I thought that was Tom Petty up until 3 days ago when I listened to this record. So I was totally, and I know Tom Petty loves the Byrds. I know that he's worked with McGuinn. I know that they've covered, I remember when on the Tom Petty Pack Up the Plantation, which is a live album that Petty did, many, back in the 80s probably, that they opened that up with So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. So I know that he's covered the Byrds before, but I didn't know that song was a Byrd song. So, and it's legit, it was a Gene Clark song. That was the main songwriter of the Byrds at the time. But this is also the album that has the Bells of Rhymney on it, which we talked about in an earlier episode, which is what George Harrison modeled If I Needed Someone, that kind of
and sure did he, because it sounds like George Harrison.
Yeah, it's that. And that was like the give and take, right? Because he was the one that first started with the Rickenbacker, and then McGuinn took it to this different level that just, made it like a signature sound of this band. And then Harrison kind of aped some stuff from it later on. But fantastic album, ends with We'll Meet Again, which is that song that ends Dr. Strangelove, and I forget, it's like this classic song that's been around for many, many years, so that was kind of an interesting surprise. But just a lot of fun, really great pop music, really great production. I love the Byrds. This was a very good album.
Go ahead, Josh.
This is my favorite Byrds album that we've listened to.
That doesn't surprise me.
I think when, like Matt said, when they go into the pop mode, as they are on this first one, probably on their second album too, I can see why they were as popular as they were. Or I can hear why they were as popular as they were. When they transitioned to the more folky jangle stuff, that never resonated as much with me as this does. I can see there's catchy songs on here. There's great harmonies by the members, and you can see why the Byrds were popular. I think the album started out stronger for me in the front than in the back, but there are good songs throughout. I like some of the themes I noticed on this album were just about love and also like kind of like unrequited love or something about friendship too, and just like good vibes, I guess, would be a general umbrella term for this album. I want to listen to their second album now after hearing this, because then I'll have, the trifecta of at least like their beginning of their career. I still need to listen to Sweetheart of the Rodeo, but this is a promising
get prepared for something completely different than this and the other two Byrds albums.
Yeah.
Well, they actually have two in between this and Younger Than Yesterday. So
yep.
you'd have Turn, and
yep.
then Fifth Dimension.
Oh, that's two more dimensions than I'm used to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that being said, it's still not. It's a slight recommend for me. I wasn't like bowled over, especially compared to some of the other albums that we've talked about in these segments. But it was a pleasant surprise. I was expecting, more of what we'd heard before, and it was different.
Gotcha. Well, I like this album a lot. I don't know if I like it as much. In fact, I know I didn't like it as much as Younger Than Yesterday, and I liked it the same as Notorious Byrd Brothers. One thing that I really like about the Byrds is they write really good songs, and they do other people's songs exceptionally well. There's a part of me that thinks the Byrds should have just been the Bob Dylan should have just given his songs to them, and they should have just been his like house band, and he should have been like the Clive Davis to and they were the Whitney Houston, right? Just singing his.
He was the Jerry Goffin and Carole King.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
there you go. That's what I was going for. I think
down
even
to
more.
3 minutes, 3.5 minutes.
Because I mean, they do Dylan better. They do exactly, and you guys keep taking sort of my points, which is awesome because we're seeing the same thing. It's like they managed to take Dylan, get the quality of his songs, but also narrow out the parts of Dylan that are too expansive and really get to the heart of it. The jangle guitar is fantastic. The Byrds have really interesting hooks. Would you agree, guys? And what I mean by that is they don't stay in a hook as long as most people do. They get there, it's distinguishable, but then they get out of it as quickly as they get there, and they sort of meander to that hook. Do you guys notice that, or is that just something I'm picking up?
I haven't. I don't know. I can't say that I've picked up on that. I'm not saying it's not there, but I wouldn't say that was a take that I had from it.
Okay.
I can agree that they write really great hooks. It's an interesting take, and I would probably have to go back and listen to it a little bit more.
Let me give you an example, because why the Byrds never sound dated to me is because you can see how many people were influenced by how the Byrds sound. And I'll give you a perfect example. In the 1980s, off the top of my head, REM, The Smiths, The Cure, 10,000 Maniacs, all those bands were clearly influenced by that jangle guitar sound. There's a guitarist in each of those bands that's basically doing that sound. But all of those bands couple it with big hooks that are that repeat and that build up from the first verse, escalate, and then into the hook, right? And the Byrds don't always write songs like that. The exception to that rule would be Turn, 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 which ironically enough is a song that we didn't cover in any of these albums.
Well,
but
you're talking about you're not talking about songs that they wrote.
I'm talking about songs they did in terms of how they structure songs and stuff like that. I love this. I mean, nothing's changed with the Byrds. They sound, for an album that was released in 1965, it's way ahead of its time. It's super. I've said many different times, I don't mean to go into cliches, but it's a lot of the music of the 60s, you can see who its fathers were, but it doesn't have a lot of children, which was the thing that I most noticed about the 60s. Not a lot traveled, but the Byrds, my gosh, they have tons of children. And that's what always stands out to me, because it's clear that a lot of people listen to these albums or listen to the next generation of artists that clearly listen to these albums, and they themselves were influenced. And so I think the Byrds have real legs, and I just enjoyed it. It's hard. I can listen to any of these four Byrds albums, and they're all very different is the other thing that's really cool about it. And they changed their personnel, like, because Gene Clark's on this one, right?
Yes.
And then later, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, we've got no David Crosby, no Gene Clark, we've got Graham Parsons, right?
Nope.
And then
and
then Roger McGuinn and the Hillman, right? The bassist.
Well, they're the only two. They're the only two people that are there throughout the whole time. But they're definitely switching personnel. And I would also, I mean, it's interesting because I'm just thinking about when you're talking about influences, it's not just like people of the 80s, but like there's a lot of the alt rock bands of the 90s, not the grunge ones as much, not like the heavier bands, but there's a lot of like, and a lot of it is to the generic rock of the 90s, but some of it was really good too, like REM or whatever. But they're, they carried for decades, and that's one of the things that makes me wonder, like, why did I not try to, because I've always been aware of the Byrds, but like I never got like, oh, I need to get this album where I really knew their stuff very well. And just in doing this, I'm just growing so much more, just a much stronger appreciation for them. And it's just like one of those things, how did I, like, I should have been into this way before, we started this project. So, I can't say enough good things. And the production, I just go back to the production.
Yep. Again,
you're right. 1965, and it sounds this crisp and this clear and this, like, this modern, it's just, it does sound 60s, but it's a minimal 60s kind of sound. And overwhelming, overpowering, feeling that I'm getting from this is just like a modern, day, pop rock recording is what it is.
Yeah.
So props to that, whoever's producing this.
What do you think it is, Josh? We're at about the 5-minute mark. What do you think it is that doesn't resonate with you about the Byrds, Josh? Because I'm not in any way saying, because there's bands that I, have been very vocal that you guys have liked more. But what do you think? Because obviously Matt and I clearly are fawning over them.
Yeah.
Different stuff.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about, every time we've listened to one of their albums, and I still can't put my finger on it. I think it's something with the folkiness of it. It's just not, or maybe like you said, John, there's just not enough strong hooks, or like the way maybe the song structure themselves doesn't work for me on some level. It's something that I'm still wrestling with, really. And I haven't revisited those albums since we've, did them way back in the early days of CTS, but maybe now that we've gone through the entire 60s, something will strike a chord with me.
Well, and if you're not feeling it, though, I appreciate that you bring a different take to it, because that's what keeps it authentic, and that's just, I think, what's interesting, because sometimes stuff just doesn't resonate. We've joked a lot, but I don't think any less of Matt for, like, the Otis Redding thing clearly struck with me and you, but didn't with Matt, and in this case, there's ones I know that I felt very different about than you guys did. So it's
you were a little angry with me at the Otis Redding than you are, Josh, about the Byrds.
That's
I wouldn't say angry is the wrong. I was confused because we'd done a Sam Cooke album so shortly before that, and to me, it's weird to me that you were super enthusiastic about Sam Cooke and didn't like Otis Redding. I think that's what was baffling. Whereas, like, Josh, for example, there's other bands similar to the Byrds that Josh had similar takes on, right? So it wasn't
he's more
as
consistent
to me. Yeah, more so, like, there wasn't a band that sounded like the Byrds that Josh was effusive about and then said he hated the Byrds. I think that's what it was, yeah.
You guys talking about it, something that may be a key to it is that I feel like the Byrds don't have any edge to them. They're very gentle with their lyrics and with their melodies and kind of their vibe and tone. And I think that is maybe one of the reasons why, because even though they make good pop songs, even like the Beatles have like an edge to them, and especially in their later albums. And I don't think the Byrds ever like bring that to the table.
That's interesting you say that, because I think of the Byrds as being edgier than the Beatles in some ways.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, though, because
but I do, yeah.
It's like there's no like like with the Beatles, sometimes with a Lennon or McCartney vocal, or like a John Fogerty. I'm thinking, like, I know you, Creedence was one of your favorites, or your favorite. Like, Fogerty can kind of come in with like a screaming, kind of like, guttural kind of thing, and you're not getting that from McGuinn's vocals or or Hillman's
Well, and
vocals.
he's
it's
writing
more of a cleaner,
very
kind
traditional
of sound
hooks.
in that regard.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He's writing very traditional hooks, which kind of goes back to what I said. Like, I mean, you don't have to search far at all for the hooks in a CCR album. They're right there,
Right, but I think that's also what the Sonic. It's a poppier kind of crisper, sound, as opposed to like there's some CCR stuff that gets a little swampy, a little like bluesy, and a little sludgy.
Right.
The Beatles can have some of that,
But
you're not really getting that with this. So that
it always builds that coda though that we talked about. It's like in a CCR album, it's going to be like dun 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 dun, like it escalates. You know what I mean? And then it's like, I'm thinking of like Looking Out My Back Door, right? But it could be a lot of CCR songs. It's like the lyrics, escalation into a bridge, right? Chorus. The Byrds rarely ever do that. And I wonder if that's a piece. That was kind of what I was trying to get at with the chorus before. And maybe that, because I know Josh likes the Kinks, Josh likes CCR, and those are bands that write. Well, it's like, I mean, the Kinks are the same way. Like, I think like Picture Book, right? Like, same exact song structure, and then like of course like picture book, think about your butt. Like you rarely ever get hooks like that from the Byrds outside of like I said, like Turn 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 is the only one, and it's not even their song, it's basically a cover. So maybe that's what it is, Josh. You know who else doesn't do that and you were lukewarm on is the band.
Yep. So maybe that's the key there, something about either how they structure their songs or if there's not a strong enough.
I'd say the band has a little bit more edge to at least when I hear you say edge, Josh, I think we're talking about, but I'm not saying you're wrong, John. I think it's just like it's two separate things, and maybe we're honing in. Well,
I was just saying song structure. The band don't write, they write the same type of hooks the Byrds do. Think about like take a load off, but how long do they stay in that? Like 15 seconds tops, right? And then they're out of there. Yeah. So, all right, we got 20 seconds. Any last thoughts?
Well, I like throwing these in here just for context. So this is number 110 in the 1960s. So and actually Younger Than Yesterday is now 105, and Sweetheart of the Rodeo is 102. So three of the four albums that we've covered are now technically outside the 100.
BestEverAlbums.com. Their taste is in the mouth.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm going to put a bow on this episode. So I think we have 2 recommends and 1 non-recommend for actually you were a slight recommend, right, Josh?
Yep.
Yeah, you're not shitting on them. You're just like, you're not like over the moon.
Right.
Yeah. It's fair.
So 2 strong recommends and a slight recommend for the Byrds, Mr. Tambourine